Today we're working on a 2006 Ford Expedition. We'll be replacing this wheel hub assembly on this side. First thing you want to do is jack it up, put it on jack stands, take the tire off. We'll want to break this loose, so if you don't have power tools, what you can do is with the tire on, still on the ground, with the hubcap pulled off, then you can break that loose before raising the vehicle. This center nut is a 36 millimeter. You could put some penetrating fluid or some kind of lubricant on it, so once you start it loose, it'll continue to come off without binding up or anything. Sometimes it gets rusty, so having some kind of lubricant on it is helpful. But 36 millimeter, we'll pull that off first before we do anything else, because if we can't get that nut off, you know, there's no sense in proceeding. So that's what I'm going to do first. So now that we got that nut off, we want to go ahead and remove the rotor. So the best way to do that is to remove the caliper bracket, and there's an 18 millimeter bolt up here, and then on the bottom there's an 18 millimeter right here, other 18 millimeter bolt there. And before we remove it, what we can do is just take a pry bar or screwdriver, push it in there and give it a tug, and that'll push the caliper piston back and make it kind of loose, so it will separate or come right off of the rotor just that much easier. So two 8 millimeter or 18 millimeter bolts there and there. We'll pull that, rest it up here, and then that rotor can come off. Now that the caliper is off and secured out of the way, this should just slide off. If it's not sliding off, you could just tap it with a hammer in between the studs, and that'll vibrate it loose, and then it can pull off. Before we get too far, we can go ahead and unplug the wheel speed sensor. You can follow it up and over around the frame, and this is where it plugs in right here, and then just unclip it. It has these little holding clips. Just unclip it all the way around and then just leave it dangling. So now we want to go to the back of the knuckle here, and you see where the CV axle goes in. There'll be 4 18 millimeter bolts, 2 on top and then 2 on the bottom. I already started getting this one out using a ratchet with an extension and a wobbly. So the top here, that's a wobbly top. Looks like that if you ever get one. But it allows you to put the socket on and get past this little boot on the axle. You might not need the wobbly, but definitely an extension to get past this. Let me get the rest of these off, and then we'll get to the pulling out part. The only weird one was this bottom one here, because of the control arm was in the way, so I just used a wrench the whole time to pull that one out. Once I got it loose, it really just came out with my fingers, but I wasn't able to get a socket on that one. So now that all 4 are done, we can go ahead and tap on the center here. They put a punch hole if you're using a hammer, an impact hammer. They've also beveled the edges, so you can go ahead and just use a regular hammer. You just want to make sure that it will come loose from or separate from the hub. If you feel like you're gonna have to beat on it hard, then just go ahead and put this on to, you know, somewhat flush like that, so that you don't ruin the threads by accident. If you have to hit on it, you know, a little with some good force. If tapping is, you know, that's no big deal. But if you're hitting it hard enough to mush on the metal, then just put the nut back on. After that, it's separated from the rear. This won't take much to pull it off. They do have tools with like slide hammers and all that other stuff that you can rent from the auto parts store, but I'm not gonna have to do that for this. There's also another tool that bolts onto here, and you hit it with a hammer, and just different ways to getting it off. I'm just gonna try and tap on it to get it off, because it's, you know, it's already loose. So this was an easy one. So that's it. So let me pull this off and go from there. All right, there's the hub out. I had to hit it on the edges a bunch of times before it was able to come loose enough. And then also right here, there's a grommet right here that goes in this from the backing plate. It goes right in here. So that just gets pushed out from this backside. You could just push it through right here, just push it in, and that comes out. If your new wheel hub does not come with a new sensor, then you could take this out. It's a 5 millimeter Allen, and that come out, and then the wheel speed sensor can pop off. I think a lot of them do come with new sensors as well. Or if you just like OEM sensors, you can probably just do that, pull that out, replace, and then you have a new sensor lying around. Anyway, that's up to you. So that's it. The hard part's done. Next is installation. We'll go ahead and do that together. Alright, so now that we have the new wheel hub, we want to go ahead and check it with the old one, just make sure it has the right bolt patterns in the right location, how many wheel studs it has, and things like that, just to check, make sure. Quick visual inspection. Once everything looks good there, we can go ahead and clean up our surface. Between this dust plate and the knuckle, we want to go ahead and make sure that there's no debris in between, because the way the hub sits on the face of this, if there's anything in between, it'll cockeye the wheel hub. And then we want to clean out the inner surface here. So just make sure all your surfaces look good, look nice and clean. And then what I like to do after that is just on the inside here, put a little anti-seize for where this back right here goes in, right here. That'll fit in right here. So we want to just put a little anti-seize, doesn't take a lot, just a little film surface for future rust prevention. And then I also like to put just a little anti-seize on these splines here. Again, not a crazy amount, just enough to create a film. Once our surface is cleaned off and good to go, we'll start by threading our wheel speed sensor through that hole. Once we have that through the hole, we can go ahead and put our hub over the axle and kind of get those splines in like that. We could try to match up where our threads go and where the holes are on the knuckle there, and then we can get some bolts going through to thread on. And we're gonna put some Loctite on these as well. Before we get too far along, you can go ahead and put that grommet back in its place. Getting the first one started is the hardest. You just have to wiggle this, try to line it up, and then come through the back with a bolt and just keep spinning until it catches some threads. Once you have the first one in, then the second one is a little easier, and then the third and fourth is easy, but you just have to wiggle it, move it around for it to catch some threads and get it lined up in the hole. There's no real magic trick to it, just time, patience, and you'll get it. So what I like to do in the back is just snug them down all the way, and that'll suck the wheel hub in it, you know, back as far as it can, mated, and then I'll take one at a time, pull it out, then put my Loctite on and put it back in. Then I'll do that to all four, and then I'll torque them down. The torque on those back bolts are 136 foot-pounds. One thing that helped to get to these back bolts with a torque wrench, at least for me that helped, was to undo this lower control arm bushing. It's not necessarily a ball joint, but it kind of acts in a similar way. But anyway, that through bolt, it's a 30 millimeter. So when you take it off, you have to put it back in, torque it back down to 295 foot-pounds and use Loctite as well. Or you can replace that nut. So if you reuse the nut, you need Loctite. If you replace the nut, then Loctite's not required. That's just what helped me. If you're able to get some extensions or a wobbly or something in there to torque that down, because 136 foot-pounds is quite beastie. So that's what I had to do to get those torqued. You might find a different way, but so once those are all done, we can go ahead and put our center nut on. This nut here is tightened to 221 foot-pounds. Now it's interesting because the information that came with the new wheel hub, which is not from Ford, it's aftermarket, but that says to tighten it to 250 foot-pounds. So use your judgment there, but Ford says 221. Now that center nut's on, if you're going to torque it down last, you can go ahead and leave it. Just don't forget when you put the tire back on, lower the vehicle down to torque that. So that's that. Now we can go ahead and put our brake rotor on. And let me show you what I like to do to hold it in place while I put the caliper on is just use a wheel nut and just put that all the way down and tighten it on. And that'll hold it in place so when you're putting the caliper back on, it's not going to move on you. So just a little tip. Once that's on, then we can go ahead and put our caliper on and put those two bolts in the back. The caliper nut here on top and the bottom are both torqued to 140 foot-pounds. We can go ahead and route our wheel speed sensor wiring around the frame and plug it in. Once the caliper's torqued down, double check your work, put the tire back on, take it for a good test drive, and hopefully everything's good. Because you have rear toe adjustment here, wouldn't hurt to put it on the alignment rack, and that's it. Thanks for watching. Hope this was helpful. We'll see you on the next one.